Yeah. Yeah. I'm starting my shear in a minute. You okay? Want me to bake something? Yeah. Hello.
Hello. Oh, you're back in town?
Yeah, I'm back.
Well, you couldn't stand the good weather?
It was beautiful. It was very nice.
It was so hot yesterday, high here.
It was cool. I don't understand why it was so hot here and not in the Palm Springs. Crazy.
Here, it was hot, hot, hot.
Really? I'm
And
looking here. It's supposed to be very hot on Thursday.
in the morning,
Really?
it's cool,
Yeah.
not cold anymore, cool. But then it got near 90.
Yeah,
Yep.
Thursday and Friday are gonna be 91.
Wow.
Yeah, here.
Yuck.
So
Yeah.
I'll have to put the air conditioning on.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Jorge, dichosos los ojos que lo ven.
Trato. You know what my problem is that when you guys learn, I have a choice. I can either join you or try to help them make the minyan. We have davening now later,
Hmm.
so they don't start till like 6:45.
Yeah,
So
the
I
time.
can't. Yeah, I can't get back in time. Otherwise, I may start joining you from the car and just not you can't see me, but I'll be able to listen. It's
Okay.
good stuff. It's all good stuff.
Okay.
Okay, is
Evening,
right.
everybody. We are on Nun Vav 56. We said that the word, when we said v'samach, we said v'samach yado al rosh ha'ir, is to say that the chatas that the Nasim would bring by the Chanukas Samishkan required smicha, leaning on it. That when the tzibur brought a goat to atone for idolatry would also require leaning. So maski floravina, tinech Rabbi Yehuda. That works according to Rabbi Yehuda, who held that it required smicha, the Nesiim. But the Rab Shimon, who holds that it does not require smicha, Mike Lememar, what would he need the pasuk to teach you? Amar Lemar Zutra, but Rav Mer Ravina, Rabbi Yehuda Nami, it's a kasha on Rabbi Yehuda too. My dis Rabbi is Rabbi. For that which the Torah specifically included, it includes my Lois Rabbi, Lois Rabbi. That which it did not. So, for example, it requires smicha, but it doesn't require being shechted in the north, like we wanted to say. If the Torah had not specifically removed the requirement that you shechted in the north, otherwise, I would have learned the halacha from a binyan av. Smicha gufilish de kramina. Let the Torah be silent about smicha, the taste of binyan av, and I would have learned it in binyan av as well. But there was a reason we couldn't. Shah midoras lo yalfina. Requirements for korbanos that were done in the future for the later generations, you can't use to teach about halachas regarding korbanos that were only temporary. The korbanos that the Seirim brought, that the Nesim brought, were only temporary for that generation. In all cases, Shor Midor Lo Yofi. Okay. So when it says V'shachat oso, Ela oso ton sof and v'na shoichid omi v'tzof, came to teach me something else. The animal has to stand in the north. But the guy who's shechting it does not have to stand in the north. He could be standing a little bit in the south. And the animal, he reaches over and he shechts it in the north. Mid Rabachia nafka. The Gemara says we already learned that from another halacha. The Tanya Rabachia oimer. V'shachat oso al yerech hamizbech tzafona. You shall shecht it in the north. When the person receives the blood after shchita, he has to be standing in the north and receiving it in the north. If he stood in the south and reached over to the north and received it that way, it would be invalid. So I might think that the shoichet as well, if he stands in the south and shechts, even though the animal's in the north, it would be puzzle. Talmud Lemer also, but the ola, everything has to be in the north. But the shoichet, in this case, does not have to be in the north. The Gemara also learns that when it says v'shachat oso, only that korban, the chatas that the melech had to bring, had to be shechted b'tzafon, and the malika of a bird does not have to be done in tzafon. Now, why would I need this? Why would I have thought otherwise? Because I would have learned a kal v'chomer from a sheep. The shchita of a sheep or any animal did not need a kohen. Even a Yisrael could do the shchita. Yet, kavalot tzafon, when you bring an ola of a tzon, you have to do it in the north. Benov shekavalot kohen. Now, a bird is killed with a process called malika, where the kohen used the fingernail to pierce the back of the neck of the bird. That's how they killed it. They didn't use a knife for shchita. They did malika. So, and the malika has to be done by a kohen. From that kavachomer, I would have understood from logic alone that a bird would have to be the malika would have to be done in the north. So I need the pasuk v'shachat oso v'lo benov. However, the Gemara says I could reject the kavachomer. Mala ben son shekin kavala kli. A sheep requires a kli, a knife, to shech. A kohen doesn't uses a fingernail. Then we're back to why do I need the pasuk to exclude a benov? So the Gemara is rejecting all of these and moving on to other possibilities. Elo also b'tzafon ve'in pesach b'tzafon. So when it's said by the chatas that the melech had to bring v'shachat oso and not something else is the pesach. That the korban pesach does not have to be shechted in the north. Freiti Gemara pesach b'Rav Eliezer ben Yavka nafka. We don't need this drasha of oso to tell me that the pesach does not need the north. We learn it from Eliezer ben Yaakov, the Tanya. Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Yachol Yeya Pesach Ton Sofon. I might think that the shechita of a korban pesach needs to be done in the north, v'dinu, and you can learn it through logic. Uma ola shelo kavala zman b'shchitasa. An ola doesn't have a specific time which you bring it. You could bring a donative ola can be brought at any time. Yet kavala tzafon pesach shekavalo zman l'shchitasa. We know the zman of a pesach has to be done in the afternoon on the 14th of Nisan. Eino din shekavalo tzafon. However, you can reject that. Mala ola sheken kolim. You can't learn from an Ola because an Ola is more stringent because it's completely burnt. Okay. So the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, though, could learn a Kal V'chomer from Chatas, Mechatas, to tell you that the Pesach has to be shechted in the north. But you can't learn from Chatas because the Chatas is more stringent than a Korban Pesach. Right? A Kal V'chomer has to go from Kal to Chomer, from lenient to stringent. So the case from where the case that you learn from has to be more lenient. If you bring proof that it's more stringent, you can't learn a Kal V'chomer. So that's how we're rejecting these Kal V'chomer. You can't learn it from Ola because an Ola is completely burned, so it's not more lenient than a Pesach is eaten. A Chatas comes to atone for people who chayv kares. Not Korban Pesach doesn't do that. So May Ashram, I could have learned it from Ashram, Mala Ashram Shken Kotche Kotchim. It is in the category of Kotche Kolim. Pesach is Kotche Kalim. And from a combination of all of these, Mikulanami Shken Kotche Kotchim. So the Gemara, the Oso, was not needed to teach me that the Korban Pesach does not need to be done in the north. Ela la'olam k'dakamir mi'ikara. Also b'tzafon ve'ena shoichet b'tzafon. We're back to this limud that the animal has to be in the north, but not the shoichet. Udika kashalach min Rab Achya nafka. You had a problem. We already learned that from Rab Achya. The teaching of Rav Achi didn't come to exclude the shoichet from north. In fact, the shoichet does not have to be in the north. But the makabel, the one who receives the blood, has to be standing in the north. There's a gzeira shava from v'lokacha kohen to this one. Lokach lokach lo mashma. He didn't learn. Rabbi Achya didn't have this gzeir shav of lokach lokach, so he needed the pasuk. Okay. The Mishnah said, we said in the Mishnah that you're chayiv for baking a mincha if it's chametz. Not only baking, chayiv al ishasa, al arichasa, al afiyasa. You're chayiv for baking it. You're chayiv for kneading it, for shaping it, and for baking it. Amrav Papa. Afa, if you bake it, like a shtayim. Achas larichasa v'achas lafiyasa. The baking sort of completes shaping. Therefore, you get malchus both for the baking it and the final shaping it. I thought we were taught the baking is sort of a unique, distinct act. Not for something else. The Baraisa that says that you only get one malchus if you bake it is where the same person shaped it and baked it. But the case of the two, you have two different people. Another person shaped it, so he's chayiv for the shaping. The person who was brought to baked it. So there's two malchuses. Or you could say the guy who baked it, he now is sort of finishing the job of shaping it. So he gets two. He gets one for the baking and one for the final shape. Okay. Ton Rabbana. Bechor sha'ach zodah. This was George will remember the history of medicine. Galen was a Roman physician who lived in the 2nd century. And a lot of medicine for the next 1,500 years was shaped by this Galen. And they talked about humors, black humors, and they talked about people having too much blood. This is this achsodam. George Washington, we know, he died through bloodletting, right? He had a pneumonia, and the medical treatment at that time, they would open up their veins and bleed them because the thought was, it was Galenic medicine, that they had too much blood. And basically, George Washington was bled to death. Harvey, 1650, about that time, so he discovered the whole concept of circulation, heart and lung and everything. So they became much more modern in their understanding. But even so, George Washington died 1796, 1797. It was after Harvey. You could just see that medicine was really in the dark ages until, middle of the 19th century, a little bit, beginning of the 20th century. So,
Ernie, one of the interesting thing, since you brought this up, is that when you sit and analyze the whole development of science, not only medicine, but science in general, comes with the concept of accepting that there's only one God. Why? Because then suddenly with one God entity, the rules are universal. Till then, rules weren't universal, and people don't grasp that. It was only when they could start looking at the world as a unified idea that everything else began to move. Anyway, I don't want to take a lot of time, but it's really
I was hoping you would say that, because that's what I was thinking, that there would be laws that would apply everywhere, like
right.
Newton, and the
all of that.
It
all began, and it was all with the beginning of the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment is a fascinating thing because it was a rabbi in Italy, in the northern part. One time I'll share all of that with you guys, because it's fascinating how even the Enlightenment is a byproduct of them taking the concepts of what was developed by then of the ideas of mysticism in Judaism and applying it to the church and the liberation that brought. Without that, they would still be in the Dark Ages.
Right. Now, remember, Newton, they were all deists.
Yeah.
They believed that God created the world, but then he separated from the world, and that that there was not really hashgacha pratis, but because there was like you say, a creator, that you could unify the laws that way. So science certainly moved forward. So here's the same bechor sha'ach sodam. They've diagnosed this animal that has too much blood. So makisno so sadam. So you would do bloodletting. Now remember, we have many times in the Gemara where the people would have bloodletting as well. Hakazas dam. This is Galenic medicine. Now we have a problem. The Bechor comes out, the firstborn, and it's already Kedushas Mirechem Imo. And the Bechor is given to a Kohen, but the Kohen has to offer it as a korban shlami. Now, if the Bechor got a mum, which made it invalid for a korban, but not treif, so now that Bechor becomes the personal asset and property of the Kohen. Well, there is a problem with that. The Kohanim were greatly suspected of surreptitiously putting a mum in the Bechor that was given to him. Why? If he was makrivit as a korban, fine, he can eat the meat, but other parts are offered, and there are restrictions. If the animal is chulin, and he can eat it when he wants and shecht it when he wants, and et cetera, it's a much more valuable monetary asset for him. So there were a lot of these laws, and we're going to learn it in Masechta B'chayros, about we didn't trust Kohanim when they had the Bechor. So a Bechor that has been diagnosed with this bloodletting, Mekizna soap. However, b'makom she'eino osim bo mum. You had to open up his wound in a part that would heal, that would not create a permanent mum to invalidate the korban. You would not do bloodletting in an area which would not heal, and therefore would make so for example, the eye or the ear would be places that would passel the animal as a korban. Dear Rab Meir. You can be makers even in a place there's no lav, because there's a life-threatening illness. That already means it's a blemish in some respects. And therefore, there is no isser of making a blemish in a previously blemished animal. However, you cannot shech the animal based on that moon. You got to wait until it gets another moon. Because again, there's an incentive there. Rav Shimon Oimer, af nishchat alo somu. No. He says you can even shech the animal. He's more lenient. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, afilu mei sein makis lo sadam. He's the most stringent the other way. You let the animal die. And we don't allow anyone to make a blemish in such an animal. Now, what is the point of this machlokas here? The issue was whether it's considered blemished already because it's sick, and is there a lav to inflict a blemish on an animal that's already blemished? And we're going to bring other examples of this. We've already learned you're not allowed to cause a mincha to become chametz. Now let's say it's already chametz. If I, let's say, add a more leavening agent, I'm chayiv again. D'chsiv lo saseh chametz, don't prepare it, and lo se'afeh chametz, and don't bake it. Rav Chia, and here's a urology issue. B'mesaris achar mesaris shu chayiv. If an animal's been castrated, and you castrate it again, I will have to explain how you do that. Shu chayiv. So most of the Meforshim explain, farmers were, castrating their bulls and their stallions thousands of years ago to reduce, they would be wild, etc. So sometimes they would snip the blood vessels in the scrotum. So therefore, they've essentially castrated the animal. Or even, let's say, doing a vasectomy technically would be misaris the animal, even though the testicle is there. Then if you later on remove the testicles from the scrotum itself, that's misaris achar misaris. And you're chayiv Allah for that. T'chsiv. Uma'uch v'chatut v'natuk v'charut. Ma'uk means squeezed, chatut means crushed, natuk means detached, charut means cut. And im al koresu chayiv, if you're chayiv for cutting it, al noitek, for completely detaching it, lo kol shekin, el lavi noitek achar kores, shehu chayiv. It means if you detach the testicle after you cut them, you're also chayiv. That's misaris achar misaris. There's no machlokas on any of those. Lo nechlaku el b'matil mum b'bal mum. The machlokas is if you inflict a mum on an animal that's already a bal mum, is it considered that you violated something or not? But Meir Savar, kol mum lo yebo, any blemish even if you blemished after blemishing. Rabbanon sarvi tamim yela ratzon. It just has to be tamim. If it's not tamim, it's already not tamim. You don't add to it by making it worse. Rab Meir nami haksiv tamim yela ratzon. Ahu lemute balmum meikara. That teaches that if an animal is born with some congenital abnormality, you cannot offer it. There, it was never roy to be a korban. So then, making a mum in such an animal, you would not have a lav. But if the animal you could have used for a korban, and it got a mum, and now you make another mum, le Rab Meir, that would be a problem. What do you mean? An animal that's a balmum, when it was born, is like even a tree. We know that a tree cannot be used as a korban. There's no issue of a mum, so we don't need a pasuk to tell me about an animal born as a mum. Let's say an animal is hegdish, and it becomes puzzle, and then you redeem it. Now, such animals, you can eat them. They're not hegdish anymore, but there are prohibitions. You can't shear their wool. You can't work them. It would be a bizoyon. Maybe I would think b'mumam nami litzri. Maybe I would still be prohibited from putting a mum in them. Kamash Prolon, that no. Rabbanan nami aksiv kol mum lo yebo. What do they do with kol mum? Rameir includes even doing a mum in an animal that was already gemummed. What do they do with that drasha? They use kol mum lo yavo from something else. Kol mum lo yavo ein li ela shlo yavo mum. I know I can't inflict biyadayim a mum. Minayin shlo yigrom lo al yadei acherim. What if I cause a mum? And the Gemara's classic example is putting a piece of dough on the ear of the animal. A dog or an animal is going to come to bite it because it wants to eat the dough. By biting it, it makes a mum in the ear, which is a place that an animal can become invalid for korbanos. Don't put a piece of dough or fig on the ear. Your intent is for the dog to come take it. Meanwhile, the ear is going to become a mum. Talmud loymar kol mum. Amar mum v'amar kol mum. Even an indirect creation of the mum, you would get a lav. Amar Ravami hiniach sa'or gabi isa. Sa'or is yeast, and it's a fermenting agent. And you put the yeast on dough of a mincha. V'halach v'yashav lo. And it takes time for that yeast to work and to ferment it. So it doesn't happen right away. V'nischamtza me'eleha. And this piece of dough becomes chametz. Now, this is not the normal way that they were machmid something. Usually they put the yeast into dry flour before they added the water. And they didn't need it. Here was a case where they had dough and he put the yeast on top of it. Maybe we would think that that's not enough of an action to be chayiv for being machmitzit. Chayiv aleh. K'maisa Shabbos. So, for example, if you put a piece of raw meat onto coals and you leave it there, so it takes time for it to roast, but you're going to be chayiv. So similarly, says Ravami, putting this yeast on this dough, even though it seems insignificant, you're liable for malchus if the mincha becomes chametz. Afraid the Gemara Ma'aser Shabbos ki I got them mima chayev. The Gemara says I don't agree with you. Is doing an act similar to this yeast on dough? If you did something like that on Shabbos, would you be chayev? I'll show you that you're not going to be chayev, and we'll continue that tomorrow.
Me.